And this won't be prime time if we don't have our analyst of the day tonight. I'm joined in the studio by journalist, political affairs commentator, and Arise News analyst, Dr. Constance Ikokwu. Dr. Ikokwu, thank you so much for joining me here. Back to the all-women.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, and we're twinning black.
Yes, we got the memo.
Yes.
Now, you've heard the conversations, you've heard what Senator Abdul Ningi is alleging. He says in the budget, 28.7 trillion naira budget that was passed, only around 25 trillion naira has a nexus. Only 25 trillion naira that you can see where the money is going. There's this project, there's this location. 3.7 trillion naira, he says, there's no accounting for that. What do you make of this huge allegation?
Yes, it is a huge allegation. I think to begin with, we can say that the salvo from Senator Ningi is very damaging to the National Assembly and the executive arm of government. The reason is that the National Assembly has always had a terrible image. And a lot of people view them, both the House of Reps and the Senate. They are generally viewed as houses of sleaze, where any and everything goes on. And therefore, it is not surprising to see that the legislative arm and the executive is rattled. They are rattled because you have this reputation which for many years they have done a poor job of cleaning up and building trust between them and the public and showing that they are an accountable bunch and they really represent the people and not their self-interest. And then for the executive arm, this is such a scandal that they cannot afford, given every other thing that is happening right now in the country. It's just something they wish would go away, would disappear immediately. And that's why they came swinging, trying to explain that what Senator Ningi said is wrong. And so you would hear the executive has already said that President Tinubu presented a 25.7 trillion budget to the National Assembly, and they, using their discretionary powers, raised it by 1.2 trillion, and then you land at 28.7 trillion, which was approved and signed into law by the president. But Senator Ningi is saying that is not the issue. The amount is not the issue. The issue is that there's money, not accounted for in terms of being tied to a specific project. But you can also see the blowback that he is getting. Senator Ningi now has his head on the chopping block because this is heavy. The executive arm wants his head. The legislators, some of his colleagues want his head because this is very embarrassing to them. And so they are saying that there are mechanisms internally. If you feel something is shady, because he's essentially insinuating that there are shady deals going on. Exactly. So if you feel so, you could have raised it with us internally, and this is discussed rather than running to the public to announce this. And that is why you see that your first guest was focused heavily on, it is our reputation. He's doing damage to us. He's a member of the National Assembly. He is one of us, and therefore he should not be taking this step.
And talking about that internal mechanism, I was asking the first guest, and I want you to humor me. Do you think there might be, there has to be an issue, right? There has to be a fundamental issue for a senator of that standing to go and say, look, this budget, 3.7 trillion, I don't know where it went. From my findings, I had a consultant or however he found it, and he's saying, I don't know where this 3.7 trillion is going. He didn't just wake up and say, I'm going to see. He must have been thinking about it.
Yes.
And if he didn't take the mechanism, the internal channel to bring this forth, What might be the reason for that?
Well, your guest said he's playing politics, but that aside,
and how will that politics benefit him?
Something might be fishy. We will know more. My sense is that he will be grilled tomorrow. He's supposed to appear before his colleagues to expatiate on his allegation, and we'll have more information about what is going on. I hope that he's not being flippant. But again, people look at this and they laugh, because this National Assembly and previous National Assemblies, we've always had all sorts of scandals, both from the executive arm, the legislature, and even the judiciary. And that's why, for instance, people talk about how monies disappear and are stolen in Nigeria. And let's even extend the conversation. When you look at our country, let's situate it. We are regarded or classified as a lower middle-income country. So we sit in this list with some 23 other African countries, tiny countries such as Lesotho, Eswatini, Sao Tome and Principe, and even Djibouti. You look at our size and being grouped with those countries, and people ask, why should we be in that, group of countries? It is partly because of things like this. People feel like our monies are not being used judiciously. That's number one. Then number two, we have not very visionary leaders that lead us. And then number three, there is chronic mismanagement. And therefore, you see that at every budget cycle, you have a budget. At the end of the budget cycle, how much of it is being implemented, how much of it is used for the reasons that they have been budgeted for. That's even the bigger question. Forget about Senator Ningi. The monies that we budget every year, how much implementation do we achieve? 60%, 50%, 40%? It's something crucial that we should be discussing for the year 2024, especially in our current circumstances.
These allegations brought by Senator Ningi, like you said, actually opens the door to a lot more conversations. You just mentioned how much percentage of this budget is even being implemented. Who is held accountable if it's not being implemented? And then you have this issue of regional bias. The budget it's not inclusive. There's no equitable distribution. What are your thoughts on that issue, part of this whole big issue that we're talking about?
So when you look at the breakdown, the actual substance of the budget, so it says here that 9.2 trillion is for recurrent expenditure, 8.7 for debt service, and 8.7 trillion for capital expenditure. Can you see the breakdown? How does a country as big as us, with our size, with this population, the capital project is only 8.7 trillion? A lot of the money goes into debt service and recurrent. So that gives you very little room to wiggle and expand your economy. That's not very good. And I think it partly explains why we are where we are, really. Do you want to continue a budget like this that doesn't do much for your country? Given our size, you want, a capital expenditure budget that is 3, 4, or even 5 times that amount. That's the focus that the National Assembly and the executive arm should be looking at. How do we do better as a country? People don't want to be hearing this kind of stories. We've been hearing it for so many years. It's really time to stop and be more serious.
It just seems a bit messy that we always have issues like this. There's always some sort of very huge allegation, and then there's always a blowback. Like we've seen with Senator Ningi, his colleagues are calling for his neck, his head. People, they're sort of disassociating themselves with him, even without seeing, the evidence that he has. And this comes to a wider picture of accountability in this country, transparency, because when Senator Ningi did this interview, Nigerians already believed it, no evidence. And they say, look, this is true. We need to investigate this. So this tells us so much about the Nigerian political leaders, the legislature, or the executive, don't you think, Dr. Ikokwu?
Yeah, absolutely correct. There is little faith, very little faith in our so-called leaders. And that's why now you see everybody is running away, and they've thrown Senator Ningi under the bus because people are furious about this kind of story. And so he better have the evidence for what he is saying. But this also highlights or spotlights the relationship between the executive arm and the legislature. So the legislature, it carries out oversight functions over the executive, and the executive arm proposes, legislature, and then has to implement. So the kind of country you run will largely depend on the relationship between these two, because you do need the checks and balances. You do not need two arms of government that are in bed with one another. Yes, it is accurate that they have to work together for the overall good of the country. At the same time, they have extensive powers, and you don't want either of them abusing their powers, which has happened a lot in the past. You want a situation where they're truly independent. And so if there's something like this that is fishy going on, we don't know yet who pulled this off. If there's something fishy really going on, then someone has to account for it. Someone has to be held accountable, if it's the executive arm of government or the National Assembly themselves. So this is a very terrible look for both arms of government. And like I said, tomorrow we will hear more about it and see whether they are able to clean this up.
Okay, you listened to my first chat with Senator Sani. What are some of your outtakes from his responses? Yeah,
he said a lot. He said a lot, but I think that overall, his conversation was around the fact that the National Assembly has to be protected. He was more interested in their reputation. He kept alluding to the fact that Senator Ningi is one of us. So he should be worried if our name is being soiled in the face of the public. And so he says things like he has to come back to the House, go through the internal mechanism. Yes, that is right. And then air his grievances, or if there's something that is found. Although he also flatly said that Senator Ningi is wrong.
Yes.
There's absolutely no truth.
He said he's 100% sure.
Exactly. We will hear more again tomorrow. But the point is that much more than the reputation of the National Assembly, transparency, like you heard him to his feet, transparency and accountability is what the public wants to see.
Yes.
That is one of the reasons why you are in power. You are being paid by the public, you are being paid by taxpayers to go there and do the job and represent them. If for any reason you're doing something else that is not in tandem with your job as someone working in the executive arm of government or in the legislature, then you have no business remaining there. That is what we should have heard from him, more about how this National Assembly, I vouch for them, you can trust them, they are for the people, they truly represent the people, and they will not do anything that undercuts the interests of Nigerians. That's what you want to hear. Rather, he was more interested on, it is us, we have to save ourselves. And I think for some people, it will be a bit disappointing. Yeah, although, again, Senator Ningi better have solid evidence in regard to what he is alleging.
And we'll be on the lookout tomorrow for that conversation at plenary. Thank you so much, Dr. Ikokwu, for your analysis, as always.
You're welcome.
Well, that's it for this edition of Prime Time. To join us again tomorrow, from me and the entire team here in Abuja, it's goodbye and thank you for watching.